So earlier tonight, we went out to the theater to see the newest Shudder film, which looks like once again in 2025, Shudder is going to be dropping a good amount of their films in theaters, which they did last year, and I hope that they continue with this trend. You know, a couple years ago, they were releasing a couple, and then last year they released most of them, and I hope the same is true here. And this is one of the first that I'm aware of that's a 2025 release, and here it is in theaters. Whether it got a really wide release or not, I'm not sure, but we got it by us, so we got to see it. The Rule of Jenny Penn.
Yes.
So now, the only thing I knew about this film is that it was labeled as horror, that it had John Lithgow, and that it had a puppet, and then like right before we walked in, I found out Geoffrey Rush was in it. But that's it. I knew literally nothing else. And once again, as always, try to go into movies blind if you can, because my mind kind of started going into so many different places because I saw a picture of John Lithgow with a doll on his hand, and I'm sitting there going, okay, this could be anything. I did start to paint a picture in my head though,
Yeah.
because of that image. And it's nothing like that. It is nothing like that at all. So anyway, so as far as what this is about, we have Geoffrey Rush's character. He is a judge. Something happens, and he has to go into elderly assistance facility. And while he's in there, he meets I'll say the community bully, who
Yes.
is played by John Lithgow, and he has a puppet which he wears on his hand, and he wants everyone to understand who rules that place. It's Jenny Penn.
It's Jenny Penn.
Yeah, I thought this was great. It's, as I said, it's not the film I expected it to be because it had the horror label. I was expecting something supernatural, and it's not that. And I could definitely see people trying to argue that this isn't a horror movie, that this is like a thriller or whatever classification. I'm not here to get into the semantical argument. But before I proceed, what do you think?
I really liked it too. Yeah, I thought it was it's uh like a very compelling movie. I felt
Yeah,
really engaged throughout the film, and I quite enjoyed it. I think that there's some really good setups for some scares, and just the general situation is kind of like a nightmare to be in.
sure.
So I really appreciated that, and I thought the performances from everybody was, wonderful. Um, yeah,
John Lithgow plays a great villain.
he really does.
You
Yeah,
know,
he's scary.
I grew up and I remember seeing him in Raising Cain. Funny enough, I
Mm.
actually just watched for the very first time, shockingly, the movie Blowout by Brian De Palma with John Travolta and Nancy Allen. And the villain in that movie is John Lithgow.
Mm.
It just so happened, coincidentally enough. I had no idea he was even in that, but it makes sense since De Palma has used him in other films like Raising Cain and whatnot, and Dress to Kill. But yeah, I mean Lithgow, he is like the very like playful old man kind of character in like Third Rock from the Sun, and recently was just cast as Albus Dumbledore in the Harry Potter television series. So he has that good range to him,
Yes. Yeah.
where he can play the like sweet man that you
Yes.
really love, very lovable, Harry and the Hendersons, that kind of thing, and then he can play the evil motherfucker like the
Yeah.
villain he played in Cliffhanger. Um,
Yeah. Really good
so
range to him.
he has some great range to him. Jeffrey Rush also has that range to him. He plays a great villainous character, a very likable villainous character too, as Captain Barbossa in Pirates of the Caribbean. But he's excellent here as well. Because really what it comes down to is as I was telling Kayla when we walked out of this, this kind of reminded me of a pretty classic like high school movie where there's like the bully,
Mm.
and then the kids who don't want to fight back, and then there's that one kid who arrives at school that's like, fuck that, we're fighting back.
Yeah, yeah,
And
definitely.
everyone's like, I don't know, he's too strong, and he's,
Like we don't want to
he's the coolest
upset
guy
the
here, and
yeah.
yeah, you don't want to, yeah, exactly, disrupt the pecking order.
Yes.
But Jeffrey Rush is just like, he's not having it. He's a very strong-willed individual, and he thinks that he's in there for a short time, but while he's there, he's not taking shit from anybody. The movie does play into a trope that I'm not super in love with,
Mm.
but I was fine with it here. But for some reason, and I think it's because of my distaste for unfairness,
Mm.
something that always irks me in film is when either someone is obviously framed, or when someone has like made an accusation,
Yeah.
and then when someone comes to check the evidence of that accusation, there is none to be found,
Yeah.
and then they look like they're the suspect,
Right.
and that happens a lot, and
Yeah.
it's like, oh, it's so agitating. So like, it's not a pleasant experience for me, but that's nothing against the films when I
No, I
usually
think
watch them. But man, it irks the hell out of me. Just like when people take advantage of people's good nature,
yeah.
there's something about those things that really upset me. And so I'm always sitting there like, "Ugh."
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just like it shows the manipulation, like the level of deceit that's happening, really. But I understand. I think it is a pretty upsetting film in a lot of ways. So,
Yeah, I mean, this essentially is the horrors of getting old, right? And
yeah.
there's, at that age, you are basically reverted to a child. You can't really take care of yourself. You're pretty helpless. Your mind is not there. And our main character here, he's like a very well respected judge. He's a very,
Very intelligent
very
man.
intelligent
Yeah.
person. You can see that he has a lot of accolades. He has so much wisdom,
Mhm.
and it's starting to slip away from him. And he's a prideful person, as a lot of people can be, like, where no, I can do it myself, and no, like, my mind is fine, and then your mind isn't fine. Sometimes and I shouldn't say sometimes, we all get old if we have the luxury of making it through this life. The what's waiting for us, unfortunately, is old age, and
Yeah.
old age is never kind to anybody.
Yeah.
um and so you are very helpless, and this movie really illustrates, like, if there was somebody who was a little bit more able-bodied, and they
Mhm.
had it out for you in a facility like
Oh,
that,
yeah. Yeah.
it's just everything's against you.
Yes.
You really are just so helpless.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it as you said, like the horrors of getting old, but I mean, everything else that's going on is just very scary in terms of like the bullying aspect and everything. So it was really entertaining in that sense.
There's a couple things that I would have altered myself personally had I made the film. I'm not going to hold that against the film, because somebody else made the fucking movie. But I think we all have those things, right? These little moments in the film where you're like, oh, I wish that more of this happened, or a little less of this happened. As far as the doll aspect, which is, I think, a lot of what is going to draw people to this movie, how much of a role, how significant is the doll? And how much does it play into the film? And I think because people see a doll, right? A lot of people, when they see dolls in horror, they're immediately going to think Chucky, Annabelle, any of that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
there's nothing like that going on within this film. Now, there is some kind of unreliable narrator stuff happening, because we are dealing with, addled-minded, elderly people. So there is some stuff that visually is, maybe not happening, but this is how they're seeing it. And that a lot of that has to do with the doll. In fact, I think almost all of it has to do with the doll. But if you're going into this expecting it to be like a Chucky movie, or like, I shouldn't, because, like, I think the movie that maybe people will liken this to in their mind when they see, like, the promotional stuff, is the movie Magic, with Anthony
Hmm.
Hopkins, right? Because you got an older
Yeah.
man with a doll, and you're thinking maybe it's going to go down that path. And
Yeah.
um, I was personally thinking of like the Tales from the Crypt episode with Bobcat Goldthwait and Don Rickles when they're exchanging the ventriloquist act.
Sure.
And then the big reveal in the episode is that under the doll, like he has like a brother on his arm that's been
Right.
working the ventriloquist the whole time. I thought we were going to kind of get some kind of, supernatural element, malignant,
I
that thing,
didn't
and
see the
that's not that
trailer
shit at all. I didn't either, but
or
that's what I
any of
got
the
from the
promote.
picture.
I didn't see the picture either.
So just in case you're
So,
wondering if it's going to be anything like that, no, this is a very straightforward, grounded film told through the perspective of a man with a mind that is starting to kind of
yeah.
deteriorate.
Yeah.
But I mean, great performances,
Really
and
good.
very well directed. A very upsetting film, very well told. I just want to. Typically, I just try to let people go in as blind as possible, but I have a feeling there is going to be an expectation just because of the concepts being at play here with dolls and
Mm.
whatnot. And I want to,
Temper.
yeah, temper them a bit, just because I want people to go in with the right mindset. And I think if they do, because I kept waiting, and I was like, it was kind of distracting me from what the film was
Mm.
actually being, right? And last thing I'll say on this, huge kudos to this movie. I always like to point this out when it happens because it so rarely happens. But yes, please, more horror movies with older people.
Mm.
It's always like teenagers, and I know that's typically your audience, and a lot of kids don't want to go and watch a horror movie about old people. But I love it. It's as I said, it's very rare that you get a primarily elderly cast, and typically when you do, almost 9 times out of 10, it's in like in a home,
Yeah, I was
right?
gonna say, I think that the other part, I mean, as if you understand that like a big part of the horror is like, as we had already said, like the fear of getting old and like your body failing you and your mind failing you and all of that, which is a very like a realistic and an understandable fear that I think most people have, of course, but so much of the horror movies that involve elderly people are about that, and like making it either that getting old is this terrifying concept, or on the flip side, the old people are like scary because they're old.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. I would like to see more horror movies with older people where it's maybe not focused on that aspect as much. Like obviously, I get that there's maybe physical things that they couldn't do, which would need to be accounted for. But it would be nice to just have like a cast of characters that are older, but it's not like, oh, they're old and scary, or they're old and dying, and that's the scariness of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
sure.
yeah. So I don't think that that's an issue with this film, because I think this has like a very specific um story that it's telling, and I think it works for
Sure.
this, so it's
No,
fine. But
absolutely.
in a lot of horror movies, that is a big trope of having an older character in any way.
If you want the movie Kaylee's referring to, definitely watch a movie called We Are Still Here with Barbara Crampton. Awesome film. Highly recommended. I also like Jacob's Wife with, I think, also Barbara Crampton and also Larry Fessenden, who's also in We Are Still Here. But that's older, like primarily older people cast, but they're not in homes. And also, this movie is directed, I had forgotten to mention this, from the director of Coming Home in the Dark, which I think that if you've seen that movie, you'll understand kind of like the tone of this movie, and um, how like grounded that movie is, and how antagonistic and screwed up that movie is. Kaylee and I reviewed this movie about 3 years ago or so. It's the family on the camping trip. You remember it?
Not really.
And the guys come up and like take him hostage. One of them drives away with him, and the family remains with them. And then
I kind of remember
I'll,
it.
I'll tell you what happens in the end, and you'll remember.
Okay.
Um, because I can't reveal that here. But if you guys haven't seen it, that's the film that he did before this. Also very good. So anyway, I think we've talked long enough.
Yeah, I think so too.
But yeah, I don't know. I like talking about it. It's a good flick.
It was good.
Definitely go check it out
Worth your
and
time.
try to catch it in theaters if you can. But if you can't, I'm sure it'll be on Shudder in the next few months.
Yeah.
So, all right, we'll see you in the comments.
Bye.
Bye.